My name is Meera Mahadevan, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego, and I'm also affiliated with the 21st Century India Center. So a research study that sort of relates to how politicians might aid or impede energy access is a particular study based in India, where electricity, which is one of the resources in India that's entirely or almost entirely state-owned and provided. There remain just a few cities in the country where electricity provision is in private hands, and even that is heavily regulated. So the question around this is, to what extent does this sort of setup aid or impede energy access? So what this research study finds is that in such situations, politicians might have an incentive to misuse their control over a state-provided asset or resource like electricity, and particularly favor their own constituents. So this particular study found that electricity billing data seemed to have several anomalies where a lot of people were consuming electricity which seemed to be multiples of 10. And so when I explored further, what I found, what ended up happening is that if you were in electoral districts that were aligned with the ruling party at a state level, you tended to get lower reported bills. So your consumption, maybe you consumed something like 300 kilowatt hour, but your bill might have reflected 150. And so what the study finds is that this has a huge welfare impact, because who is paying for this excess electricity that you provided to these constituents but you weren't able to bill them for because you're billing them for way lower than they consumed? Ultimately, it comes from the utility revenues, the utility that's providing electricity. If that utility is state-owned, who is eventually bailing out the utility? It's the taxpayer. I think this particular research study isn't just about this isolated incident of political capture of electricity utilities. I think this is a very widespread practice. In India, for example, patronage politics is very common. You try to get whatever resources you have at your disposal, and you might try to redirect them towards your constituents in the hope that they continue to keep voting for you. That's one. But the other side of that is that, for example, a lot of energy infrastructure in India is crumbling. We're in dire need of infrastructure upgrades. To give you a small example, how is the corruption in this particular story even possible? It was possible because every house and every business that has an electricity connection has a very old analog meter in place, which required an actual human to go conduct a reading, come back and input that reading into a computer or a system. And that's where the system remains vulnerable to data manipulation. You're physically entering a number, you can just enter a lower number, especially if you're in an electoral district where a politician's putting pressure on you to do that. Now, what's interesting in the context of India is that the old analog meters are in massive need of repair. But you look at the news from literally 2024 and see what's happened in multiple states. You'll see Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Bihar, Gujarat. In all of these major Indian states, you have politicians who've made headlines saying, we do not want smart meters in our state. You ask them why? Because apparently smart meters overcharge their constituents. Now, if I were to read between the lines here, why would a smart meter overcharge somebody? The obvious conclusion is because that somebody was being undercharged before. Why does the politician care? Because they might be penalized if someone is now fairly charged for electricity. And so I think what's interesting is we're in a time where you see politicians blocking a lot of these infrastructure upgrades. But I think an interesting avenue for future study is how much of those announcements or how much of this blocking is politically motivated to safeguard ways in which politicians can continue exploiting the system.